Welcome back to The Real Mr. Mom. I'm Seeds, and in this episode, as I discussed in the last one, I'm going to be talking about the imperfect, perfect path of tragedy. Essentially, it's imperfect because it's bad. Something bad happen. But it's perfect in the sense that it has to happen a certain way. All these elements have to come together a certain way in order for it to actually take place. And that's one thing that I've realized. I was watching so it was like Homicide Hunter or something with my wife, and it was interesting because there's this one murder, and the interesting thing about it was that all these certain elements had to take place, and I'm sure that there are other situations, but this was probably the most transparent where you could just blatantly see it. And this individual was sadly shot in a parking lot, and the elements that had to take place was, first, he had to be in the parking lot. Second, he was a recovering drug addict, and the reason that this took place was that he ended up ripping somebody off for drugs. So he had to be there. He had to be looking for drugs, and then the drug dealer had to be there too. While the other element that had to be there was that there was a bystander there, had nothing to do with either of them, and I guess that he was looking for his moment to prove his toughness. So when this all plays out, this individual, the victim who gets shot, rips off the drug dealer. He runs away while the drug dealer starts yelling, and the thug in the parking lot sees it playing out, has no idea what the elements are, but simply sees this guy being yelled at, that he had ripped this person off. So the individual pulls his gun out and shoots him. So again, all these elements had to be there, and if you removed one of them, it's I don't want to say it's easy to say, but it's not out of the realm of possibilities, probabilities, that he would not have been shot. He might have been shot later. But again, that's one of the things that I realized with my twin brother, was that in order for him to be killed the day he was killed, which was the day after our 20th birthday, certain elements had to have taken place. Now, the most obvious was he had to be deployed. The second part would have been the time of his deployment. So if he had left for his deployment, a couple of months before he had, he would have been back by then. And so he would have been back in the U.S. before his time for him being killed. Another element was the fact that my twin brother, the convoy he was part of, was actually responding to some Marine snipers that had been ambushed. And so again, if those Marine snipers had not been ambushed, because that mission that he was a part of, that he was killed in, would not have taken place because it was in response of that ambush. And so again, that was an element that had to have taken place in order for this to play out. The X element would be the bombs being placed. I can't remember exactly how many, but it was just gobs of bombs that they had put under the road. And then lastly, the individual who pulled the trigger, so to speak, or I think I'd say pressed a button. It was an IED that killed my brother and the Marines that were with him. And again, so all these elements had to have taken place in order for that to take place. And so again, there's a certain level of, I do think everything is connected, and it does intertwine. And this isn't a matter of that we can't do anything. Like I was saying in the other video, I'm not trying to discourage people and say that life is this. I personally believe in predestination. By that I mean, I think you're going to be wherever you are at a certain time in existence. And by that I don't mean that we don't have choices. I just mean that, I think in many ways it'd be a lot like, I think our lives in many ways are very much like a video, in that the ending's always going to be the ending. And it's not that there isn't interaction, and it's not that there isn't quote unquote decision making within movies, but it's one of those things where, just from a history standpoint, that's one of the things that, I think is interesting about the concept of going back in time, and how, people would stop this or stop that, and to me, and how I would debunk that, because I think hypothetically you could go back in time. But the one thing I would say is that the problem is any interaction you would have with the past has already taken place. So if you're going to go back 500 years, you've already gone back 500 years ago, because that time has already taken place. So anybody doing anything in that time period has already done it. Did they have a choice? Yes. And so that's how I say the same thing for the future, is that wherever we're at in the future has already taken place in that time period. And so I'm not saying that we can't do anything, we can't make choices, they don't have effects, they certainly do. I'm just saying that what's going to happen, I personally believe is going to happen. And so, we can try to prevent, like I'm saying, we can try to prevent tragedy from happening, but I don't think that's a time well spent on, like I said, if you're directly, that's your profession, if you're a police officer or a firefighter or an EMT or whatever, obviously, respond to the call, obviously, try to put the fire in the house and so forth. But, you just do your best and you try to learn from mistakes or errors or finding out new information, like certain tactics aren't as effective as others. And so, again, it's not a matter of, I don't think life's about avoiding all tragedies. I don't think life's about getting out unscathed. I don't think it's about getting all the answers perfect. I think it's just about trying to do your best and not giving up. Because that was one of the things that, at least for myself, that I struggled with, was there was a good amount of time where I did give up, and I did just kind of think that somehow I just couldn't be happy. And like I said, that was the thing, was that so many times, we're so focused on trying to prevent tragedy. And I think a big part of it is just because we know how horrible it feels. I just thought about so many different things I could have done potentially to prevent my brother from being killed. But it's all a moot point because he was killed. Because, and so it's just one of those things where, I think it's important for me to reflect on realistic things I could have done differently, or things I would have liked to said, and be more vulnerable with my twin. Like I said, I can't remember which video it was in, but my twin and I didn't tell each other we loved each other until he was in Iraq, and so that's something I regretted. Was I wished I had just been a little more open about my raw feelings. My twin and I were the closest to each other, but even then, there were certain things that we would, I don't say we hide, but we just, I don't know. We were raised to be manly men, so we didn't talk about those types of things. And if one of us did, we'd kind of give each other a hard time. And we knew we loved each other quite a bit. But again, too, so that's one of the things that I would encourage people to do if they've lost a loved one, is to realize that you can't change anything. And to me, I think the only mistake that you really can allow yourself legitimately to have is if you don't correct those mistakes. Like I said, I think it's foolish to try to think that you're going to bat 1,000, because if you're going to try to bat 1,000, you're going to be constantly falling short. You're going to be constantly just looking at the fact that you got a 99 on the test, which is amazingly good. And you're going to be wishing you got 100. And so that's the thing, is if your criteria is perfection, I've got bad news for you. No one's perfect. And again, so it's just one of those things where I think it's just important to make these distinctions and to self-reflect and think, if we do these things, and again too, like I said, was that just this concept of somehow thinking that we should be able, that I say the mission in life is to not let anything bad happen to you, and to not ever make mistakes. If it's that's one of the elements too that I want to talk about next is just this concept of looking back at life, because that's one thing, again too, just kind of connecting what I was just talking about, involving as far as these certain elements that have to take place in order for tragedy to happen. And then the last one I talked about was just the sense of that your mind somehow thinks, if you're suffering from mental illness, your mind thinks that somehow you're worrying, and your focus of love towards your family, your vulnerability, is actually going to bring tragedy to them. Almost kind of like, it's like a horror movie. You think that somehow if the evil entity reads your mind, and it's almost like Ghostbusters when they whatever, they get to choose their own destructor, and they end up getting the marshmallow guy. And so it's kind of like that. It's like, we our own worst fears come to reality. And I think that that's how the mentally happy mind thinks, is it thinks that somehow, if I think this horrible thing's going to happen, that it's going to happen, I need to do anything and everything, and I need to constantly be on guard and looking around and it's just like, you can't live life that way. And you end up actually having tragedy strike, because you end up missing out on life itself, because you're constantly focused on trying to prevent tragedy. So like I said, I'm going to wrap it up, but in the next episode, I'm going to be talking about, the mental unhappy people, and those who suffer from depression looking back at life. But as always, good luck. Good night.